So welcome, 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 our beloved, brilliant colleague and sister, Christelle. So appreciate you. And as always, we begin all things by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands we're on. We acknowledge all our ancestors. We acknowledge all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all the elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we still build, share, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. So please, Christelle, tell us a little bit about yourself, introduce yourself to our viewers and listeners, and share a bit about your remarkable work.
First of all, thank you so much for having me, and congratulations on the great work that you and the whole team behind Sexy has been doing. I'm really happy to be here. So about me, I have extensive experience and mainly work in the space of economic development on a national level. And I currently sit on the board of a few organizations, one of them being the Table of Impact Investment Practitioners. So I'm the board chair of that organization and also of BOAN Social Impact Investments. And so in my roles there, supporting organizations that are really dedicated to the social impact space. And I have extensive experience working with various different organizations. I was the previous president of the Canadian Black Chamber of Commerce and also held a role, an executive role at the Federation of African Canadian Economics. And so my work and passion has always been around how do we create economic opportunities that are sustainable for marginalized and equity deserving groups.
That's incredible. That's incredible. Let me ask you another question. What inspires you currently about your work?
Yeah. What inspires me is for a really long time, I've just since as long as I can remember, quite frankly, I've always had a passion and just this internal desire to see how I can contribute to society and to my community. And now I have a whole different, type of ambition and focus around it on a way that's much more global in the approach, but also in a ways that intersect different aspects. So it's not just how do we make sure more capital is accessible to Black community. It is how do we make sure that's reflected in policy? How do we make sure that even if government shifts, that those ideas and those policies are integrated? How do we explore country to country collaborations for these equity seeking and Black communities as well? And so my motivation now has expanded, and I'm definitely thinking in a way that's just more about legacy and impacting generations to come. It's not just about us. It's making sure our great grandkids and our grandkids are also set up from a systemic perspective.
That's beautiful. My father always taught me to think globally and act locally. And I feel like our
Mm,
generation is thinking locally, thinking globally, and acting
that's
locally.
right.
You know what I mean? So we
That's right.
do all, it seems like, with some of these pervasive challenges that are emerging for our grandchildren to preserve
Yes,
legacy and ensure that we left the planet better than we found it, you know? So
exactly,
thanks for
exactly.
your transparency, leadership, and your candor. So my next
Mhm.
question is more around what challenges and barriers do you face in your work, and what are some of the approaches and strategies you use to overcome them?
Hmm. Some of the bigger challenges in my work is I think the conversation of impact investing is not one that's new. It's definitely been around for at least past 15 years. And we know if we're looking at the Canadian landscape in Quebec, they've been doing it for even longer than that. But so the conversation around impact investing is not new, but some of the challenges that I think many other fund managers are experiencing is looking at the actual impact assessment and how do you actually evaluate the impact, right? We know how we can look at it from if it's an environmental related project, is the CO2 been decreased? What are the emissions? But from a social perspective, it's very difficult to determine that and how you set up your data to be and evaluate to see how effective it is from the social standpoint. So definitely one of the something that I'm to explore. We know there's different frameworks, we know there's different approaches, but because it's still relatively new, everyone is not quite sure what is the perfect and exact roadmap to achieve that. And so that's one of the challenges, but it's also quite interesting and exciting to see, because this would help us really inform our, how we move in the space of impact investing. But when I look at in terms of strategies to help deal with this specific challenge that I see, really studying from a global standpoint what's been done in other parts of the world. We know social finance, started probably a very long time ago, centuries ago, but in terms of that actual term, with Muhammad Yunus in India, we know when they started the micro lending initiatives and that. So looking at global practices and effective in different parts of the world, and then looking at how does that apply to our context and what can we take from that to implement solutions that are effective. So that's what I like to do when looking at solutions, when trying to find solutions to this type of problem.
That's incredible. In terms of the future of social finance, impact investing in Canada, how do you feel about it? It's like, I know there's so many remarkable things happening and so many new faces and players at the table, and it's becoming a much more just, accessible, inclusive, diverse, and equitable space. But that's based off of an intergenerational struggle of folks speaking truth to power. How do you feel about the future of social finance, impact investing in Canada?
Yeah, I feel quite positive and excited to see where it's going to go. I think that a lot of the players that are in the space are doing the work in a very intentional way, and you also have a lot of people who are very knowledgeable about the space, making the decisions and making sure that they have an inclusive approach. I think that's one of the things that excites me. And if we look at Canada, we know that with the social finance initiatives, there are expectations around at least 35% of the funds making sure that they go to equity seeking groups. And so I think it's an exciting time, because it's one thing to just have the funds available, but it's another thing to have these metrics and these expectations and deliverables that have to be adhered to. And I see there's a lot of collaboration happening in the ecosystem, which I think is great. And I think one thing is the other thing is just making sure that we're also learning from these people who have been in the social impact space in Canada for a long time. When we look at Indigenous communities, when we look at what's happening in Quebec, when we look at funds that have existed in Ontario and BC for a very long time, who have done work on affordable housing, in investing in Black communities. I think it's important for us to learn from those, but also continue to do this collaborative approach, so we can really see the fruits and benefits of these types of investments. Because it's really, I think this excitement that I have for it, and I really believe that it will be quite effective. I think it will shift the conversation about economics and how we look at capitalism and what this means for the world today. We slowly are seeing that who knows how sustainable capitalism really is, which is a whole different conversation. But I think this is going to be an interesting approach to kind of challenge that a little bit more.
Absolutely. Me and my wife were talking the other night. I had a great conversation with one of my colleagues, Indy Johar, the founder of Dark Matter Labs. And he was talking about literally how our capital markets are literally terminating us, like destroying us as a species.
Literally.
And so definitely we need optimism, but we definitely have to put our shoulder to the wheel and work. So
exactly.
Always. Yeah.
Thank
So
you.
my next question is, what is your ultimate goal, and what does success look like and feel like to you?
Yes. So my ultimate goal is actually something I'm working on right now that I'm pretty excited, and hopefully by the time this airs, it's announced. But I'm working on an initiative now that's really centered around economic development and connecting Canada, the US, and Africa, working together and exploring what are those economic opportunities and trade policies initiatives around that. For me, it's looking at the future in a way that where global powers are able to work together to really have impact on policy and opportunities for various marginalized groups in those different regions. And most importantly, we know that Africa as a continent is the future, is what's next. But we also know that specific countries within the continent have other specialties where they are quite advanced in the work that they're doing. You look at Nigeria and their work in technology. You look at Rwanda and their investments in sustainability. You look at what's happening in Kenya and you see, you know, their infrastructure developments. And so it's for me, it's that. That's what I'm excited about, is looking at what's happening in different parts of the continent and working in a way that's collaborative and not exploiting the talent and the resources and the economic opportunities in these countries, but in a way that's collaborative and beneficial to the needs that we have in Canada and the US, but also helping empowering them in their people in those regions, economics of these as well, so that they don't have to leave. They continue to build the infrastructure and expand it in those regions. And so that is what I'm excited about in the work that I'm doing.
That's incredible. Thank you so much for sharing. So my next question is around the sentiments that's is really important in this season around rest being a form of resistance. And in terms of all the work that you're doing and the clear passion, vocational work that you are really shining your brilliant light on, how do you find ways and means to balance?
Thank you.
Yeah, how do you find ways and means to balance, and how are you putting rest as a form of resistance inside your tool belt or toolkit?
Yeah, when I think about rest as a form of resistance, I mean, I completely understand it. We are exhausted. We are tired of having to fight and doing the labor. And even when we think about post George Floyd, yes, there were opportunities for DEI and all of that, but there was still the labor was placed on Black people to be the educators and to be the teachers and to be to all of that. And so I understand that whole philosophy of using rest as resistance, because we've had to work for so long and be quite self-reliant for all of these years. And at the same time, for me, as much as that philosophy is one that I understand and adhere to sometimes, I also like to embrace and remind myself that we also stand on the shoulders of those who came before us. And while rest is great, there's a time and place for it, but we still got work to do. We still got work to do. And maybe it's the great grandkids who will be able to rest fully. We have work to do. And so I'm pro finding that balance. And I fully support that, especially with my Black women, because we see how Black women stand up in the face of being ostracized and being stigmatized in our society. So I feel that. And on top of that, being wives and being mothers, so that this additional labor. But we have to remember the strength that we have and the shoulders that we stand on to help move things as much as we can while we're here as well. From, again, a systemic perspective, we have to push while the momentum and while the door is open. We need to do what we need to do during this time.
I give thanks for your leadership. So it's a question that we've added recently to humanize these conversations, because we were in an ecosystem. But this is a very specific question. Your 90th birthday. You're there amongst loved ones and friends. What do you want to say about Christell?
Oh, wow. I haven't thought about that, you know. That's a beautiful question. I would want people I would want them to say that I, lived a life of love, that, they felt loved by me, especially my dear and loved ones. And I would want people to remember my dedication to helping advance things economically and socially for my community, because this is not something I started doing yesterday. Like I said, it's been a very long time, and it's just part of how I was raised as well. And so that's something that's important to me and my legacy. And I hope that I would have inspired someone to do something that was dear to them and that contributed to the world in a positive way.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. So my last question, do you have any closing thoughts or a call to action
Yes.
for our viewers and listeners?
Yes. Closing thoughts would definitely be again, thank you so much for having me on this platform. But I really want to encourage folks, whether you are working in the social impact space, you're curious about it, or you're curious about impact investing, I encourage the sentiment of collaboration, of openness. And as we, look to deal with how to measure impact and the challenges with diversity and equity and inclusion aspects to it, is being open to listen to these equity seeking groups and finding a specific method of practice around it. And so I want to encourage folks to be quite collaborative. Don't be afraid to reach out and be open and finding ways where we can all contribute to this movement. And in terms of call to action, I encourage those who may not be familiar, but when we look at the social finance funds, look at the three wholesalers that exist. They are there to invest in other existing funds or emerging funds. And that if you may be on the recipient end, if you're not a fund, and making sure you're aware of all these other uh, funds that exist so that you as an entrepreneur can go and get capital for your business. The time is right. We're seeing large investments in VC funds, even though the economy is in a funny place. It's a great time to be an entrepreneur. There's capital available, there's resources, there's trainings. And so really embrace this time to equip yourself for success and the capital that you can get for your business to take it to the next level.
Ashe, ashe, ashe. Thank you so much, Christelle, for all that you do for so many, all the actual insights, your leadership,
Thank you, Victor.
and your great vision. And we'll close the way we began this interview by acknowledging our creator, our ancestors, the various stewards of the land that we're on or that we're on. We acknowledge all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all our elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we share, build, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. Thank you again, my sister.
Thank you so much for having me. And Victor, continue the work that you do. I know me and many others wonder, when do you sleep? When do you rest? But my brother, I'm proud of the work that you do, and I'm honored to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. I appreciate that.